Good day, everybody. Coach John Maria here, life coach, study coach, special education teacher, or whatever you want to call me. I'm here to help out middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college students overcome their neurodevelopmental difficulties. Today is a special episode because for the first time on this channel, we will be featuring a special guest. And today's special guest is a longtime colleague of mine. Her name is Teacher Christine Joy Asas, or Teacher Tin for short. She is a reading specialist or a reading intervention specialist. And so we'll be focusing on, uh, I thought we'd be focusing on dyslexia or specific learning difficulties, but a reading specialist who specializes in autism. Wait a minute, what does reading have to do with autism?
Hi everyone. First and foremost, thank you for having me here in Project Fun Conversations. I am really happy to be part of this project. Okay, so why is reading important? Well, there are many benefits to reading. There are many kids at first in the early grades, they tend to perform academically or relatively well. But eventually they fall behind when they reach grade 4 and above. Now, why is this happening? Well, there comes a point in the education of a student wherein there is a higher demand and greater emphasis to read and understand long informational passages. So that's why, especially for students with special needs, it is imperative that they learn how to read because it is necessary to function independently and productively in one's society. So we use reading skills when we fill out forms, when we make orders in restaurants, or when we shop online, even when we interact in the cyber world. When we use Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we read posts and then we respond to these posts. So it is necessary for us to be able to decode these messages and make our own messages as a response or as a feedback to the things that we see in these social media platforms. So in my experience, I deal with kids who are either nonverbal or with limited speech. And after some time, when I do reading intervention, their speech really improves. And of course, like any medium naman when it comes to art, be it in music, be it in reading or literature, let us remember that it has an effect not only to the brain but to the whole person, especially one's mind and heart. When we are touched or when we relate to something that is presented to us that is aesthetically pleasing and aesthetically affects us as people or individuals, we tend to respond, we tend to engage. And I think that's the beauty of reading. If we are able to choose the right book and it speaks to our readers, to our children with autism, it tends to awaken in them the desire to engage, the desire to interact, the desire to connect and to communicate. In fact, reading is very therapeutic. There is even a strand, I believe, no, bibliotherapy, wherein we use books to be able to address an array of concerns, not necessarily just um, the ones that are related to academics, but also with regard to mental health, with regard to trauma, and so on. So reading is really beneficial in that regard. One particular benefit reading has, especially to children with autism, is that it helps develop empathy or the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person and to be able to take on different perspectives. There's a study in 2010 conducted by a psychologist named Raymond Marr. He found that reading stories to young children contribute to the idea that people have their own mental model, which in return influences their actions and intentions.
Okay, so now that we understand that reading is beneficial for individuals with autism, are there any specific tasks related to reading that people with autism specifically will struggle with?
Usually, for individuals who are referred to as high functioning, the ones in the spectrum who are identified to be needing minimal support, they are thought of as good in word recognition skills. So they're usually good in decoding, in spelling, even in grammar. Okay. Now, before we explore more about their needs when it comes to reading, I just want to emphasize that with autism, we need to keep in mind that we are dealing with a spectrum. Okay, so which means that though students with ASD or autism have shared similarities, they still have unique differences. So we cannot really generalize everything. But there are patterns that we see, especially with the students that I work with. And that's what I'm going to share with you. Okay, so difficulties of children with autism when it comes to reading are usually found in the meaning aspects, which includes the following components: vocabulary, reading comprehension, and non-oral and written language development. So many students with autism are found to demonstrate significant difficulties with high-level reading skills and as a result demonstrate poor reading comprehension. So why is this? Currently, there are three theories that help explain the unique cognitive styles or processing of students with autism that help explain why they're having difficulties when it comes to reading. So the first one is the theory of mind. It means the ability to understand and recognize that people have different feelings, different thoughts from you, and to understand also that their individual thoughts and feelings influence their actions and motivations. And this is something that is quite difficult for people with autism. So that's why they have a hard time making inferences, making predictions, or evaluating character traits. And these are the things that I support when I teach reading to them. Okay, I think executive functioning is something that teacher feel is more adept in explaining, but in a nutshell, it refers to organizing, planning, and self-monitoring. And these you all have to do to be able to direct yourself to achieve a particular goal despite having distractions. I think it's also a challenge for them to be able to itemize the steps that they need to execute when you ask them to do complex comprehension skills. That's why I use a lot of graphic organizers so that they can see concretely and visualize what were the steps that they were following and if they're doing it correctly or not. So meron din kami mga checklists, meron kami mga systems in place and rules to ensure that we address the executive dysfunctioning that occurs in their heads or in their minds. So another theory is what we call weak central coherence. So students with autism, often what happens is that they pay attention to details rather than the whole. And I think this is more amplified because they have the tendency to perseverate or to hyperfixate to a particular detail. So sometimes when we read books with my students, they tend to focus on their interests. For example, there's a student who likes cars, and if we read a story about cars, there's a tendency to focus on the cars na. So, magtatanong na yan sa akin, what's the model of the car, what's the car like, what's the speed of the car, although the car is just part of a bigger narrative. So, that's the problem, no? What happens is that they have a hard time making meaning and integrating meaning from their existing knowledge and what is presented in the text because of this perseveration and hyperfixation to specific details. So they naturally have difficulties in identifying the main idea and summarizing.
Okay, so how about this? Is there a link between their rigidity and their lack of flexibility, and then connecting that with their ability to master language and, of course, reading?
I think there is a large influence or effect. For instance, in vocabulary, we deal with words that have multiple meanings, o kaya words that the meaning depends highly on the context, or when we do writing, we call this the ability to choose the right words or word choice. So with individuals with autism, because they have this thinking that there's a one-to-one correspondence between word and meaning. Kids with autism, they are not that sensitive to these small nuances or salient features of language, and you really have to teach them flexibility when it comes to understanding these deeper layers of language, like using sarcasm, irony, or jokes, o kaya mga indirect requests, indirect orders. So, yung mga to, dito, nahihirapan talaga sila. Kasi again, the words that you use, sometimes they do not add up to the intended meanings. And there are many texts that are symbolic, no? So, ang daming literary devices, especially when it comes to poetry and higher level novels like the ones written by Shakespeare. I also noticed that individuals with autism have a hard time with pronouns. So pronouns are the most common anaphora. Anaphora refers to a word that represents another word or expression or group of words in a sentence. So we know naman pronouns replace nouns in sentences. But it's really hard for them to track who are or what are the referents of the pronouns or to be able to establish pronoun antecedent agreement. I think it also comes from the tragedy na again, the person, the name of the person is that person. And if you use another word to represent that person, then that's going beyond the one-to-one correspondence again.
Wow, that is a lot of useful information, Teacher Tin. I have just one last thing to ask you. So, as a reading intervention provider, what is your hope and mission for individuals with autism?
Okay, what are my hopes, no? Okay. So, malaki yung hope ko for the instruction of people with autism. For the longest time, the focus was more on really managing behavior. So, it's in the last 15 years, 20 years or so pa lang, the last decades pa lang tayo nagkaroon ng awareness na how about we look at academic support? Because there are many people with autism that could actually go to college, pursue a degree, finish a course and be able to become professionals, no? And ako, honestly, ang paniwala ko talaga, our next innovators, our next trailblazers will come from this population.
Yep.
You know why? Because rarely does a normal mind create extraordinary things. We always push neurotypicals or people to be, or regular people to think out of the box when we already have a population that literally and figuratively thinks out of the box. So if we want to have a group of people that could come up with innovative ideas, would come up with unique solutions to problems, I think it's really important that we ensure that people with autism and other difficulties also like ADHD, I really believe that if they enter the workforce, they have a lot to contribute. Okay, so this is not a question anymore of whether they can learn or not. It's a question of how can we support their learning, autism. So my dream is really to have more people who will work with students with autism and help them reach their full potential as individuals. Okay. And I also hope that instead of just focusing on deficits and challenges, we also explore their strengths and capitalize on it. For example, they can really recall a lot of information, especially if it's their expertise, if it's their interest. They have they can absorb so many information and they can consistently work on these activities or tasks that they're interested with for a long period of time and they don't get bored easily. But yun nga lang yung key, you really have to look for saan sila interested kasi doon sila mag-engage. Also, they are very systematic in doing things. So I think they would be able to contribute in building systems and ways of doing things that are efficient and productive. Ayan. So if you want to learn more about the work that I do as a reading specialist for students with special needs, you can follow me or like my FB page, Teacher Tin. I also have my own YouTube channel, Tin Bits. You can also email me at teachertinasas@gmail.com or ctasas at alum.up.edu.ph. And on this September, I will be talking about intervention strategies for students with autism under the Council of Reading Intervention Specialists. So I hope you can join me so that I can give you more concrete ways on how to provide intervention and instruction for people with autism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teacher Tin, for sharing your insights with us here on Project Pod. Please don't forget, guys, she will have a seminar this coming September. I'll be linking that down below here in the description of this YouTube video. So once again, this is Coach John Maria signing off. Good day and God bless you.